Authorities in the Gaza Strip say at least 35 people have been killed in an Israeli strike on a camp for displaced people in Rafah. The Israeli military claims it struck a compound owned by Hamas in the area, killing 2 senior officials from the militant group. The United Nations Agency for Palestinian Refugees says no place is safe in Gaza. We have an update.
Palestinian medics say hours after Hamas launched a barrage of rockets at Tel Aviv, at least 35 persons have been killed in retaliatory airstrikes by Israel in the southern Gaza city of Rafah. According to the medics, rockets hit tents housing displaced persons. On the flip side, the Israeli military says its air force struck a compound owned by Hamas, and the strike was carried out with precise ammunition on the basis of precise intelligence. The IDF also says it killed a Hamas chief of staff for the West Bank and another senior official behind deadly attacks on Israelis, adding that it was aware of reports indicating that as a result of the strike and fire that was ignited, several civilians in the area were harmed. But it says the incident is still under review. A spokesperson from the Palestinian Red Crescent Society says the death toll is likely to rise as search and rescue efforts continue in Rafah's Tal al-Sultan neighborhood, about 2 kilometers northwest of the city center. The Red Cross says its field hospital in Rafah is receiving an influx of casualties, and that other hospitals are also taking in a large number of patients.
The Spanish Foreign Minister José Manuel Álvarez has met with the Palestinian Prime Minister and Foreign Minister Mohamed Mustafa in Brussels. Mr. Álvarez justified Spain's recognition of the Palestinian state as the best guarantee of peace. Their encounter precedes the EU 27 Foreign Ministers meeting scheduled for today in Brussels, which will also be attended by about 6 heads of diplomacy from Arab countries. Let's turn to other stories. Australia's Deputy Prime Minister has condemned an anti-Semitic graffiti attack on a Jewish school after meeting students of the school. Mr. Richard Marles says the levels of anti-Semitism the country has seen in the last few months is more than any he has ever seen in his lifetime, and there is no place for anti-Semitism in Australia. Let's give some attention to happenings in Asia now, where 7 babies have died in a fire incident in a hospital in the Indian capital, Delhi. The Commissioner of Police says 7 babies died in a hospital discovered to be operating without a valid license. The fire incident led to the arrest of the hospital owner and the doctor on duty. The investigation also found that the hospital also did not have fire extinguishers or an emergency exit. Fires often break out in residential and commercial buildings in India due to a lax enforcement of safety norms. 12 people have been injured after a Qatar Airways flight from Doha to Dublin was hit with turbulence. The flight, which landed in Dublin shortly before 1 p.m. local time, was met by emergency services, including airports, police, and the fire and rescue department. According to a statement from Dublin Airport, 6 passengers and 6 crew members were injured in the incident, 8 of which were taken to hospital following assessment. In a statement, Qatar Airways said the flight landed safely in Dublin, but a small number of passengers and crew sustained minor injuries in flight and are now receiving medical attention. This comes days after 104 passengers were injured and a man with a heart condition was killed on a Singapore Airlines flight that was hit with severe turbulence. Other stories: in a bipartisan congressional visit to Taiwan, just days after China surrounded the island with massive military exercises, U.S. lawmakers have pledged to bolster the self-governing deterrence against China. Last week's drills were the largest launched in China in more than a year, and it came days after Taiwan swore in its new president, Lai Ching-te, who championed the island's sovereignty and distinct identity. In a news conference in Taipei, U.S. Representative Michael McCaul, chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, called the drills an intimidation tactic to punish democracy. He pledged to bolster Taiwan's defense by speeding up the delivery of defensive weapons from the U.S. The U.S. is bound by law to supply Taiwan with weapons to defend itself. Former President of the United States, Donald Trump, and independent presidential candidate Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s attempts to appeal to the Libertarian Party fell on deaf ears over the weekend, with third-party crowd interrupting and mocking both men at the party's convention in Washington, D.C. A chaotic scene unfolded as Donald Trump took the stage as members of the Libertarian Party and Mr. Trump's supporters yelled at themselves throughout his speech. This resulted in people being removed from the room and the crowd jeering, booing, and chanting, all directed at Donald Trump. Leaving the venue, he repeatedly snapped back at the crowd for the hostility, telling them at one point to keep getting 3% of the national vote every 4 years, adding, quote, "Maybe you don't want to win."
Well, thank you very much, everybody, and thank you, Angela, for that introduction. And I am truly honored to be invited here tonight as the first president in American history to address the Libertarian National Convention. Great honor.
And finally, on the news, an innovative stride. Robot engineers in China have made a robotic guide dog, which promises to be of immense help for China's visually impaired community. In a park in Shanghai, a crowd gathered to get a glimpse of a robot dog engaged in a demonstration with a visually impaired person. Holding a white cane attached to the robot, 41-year-old Li Fei was guided through the park by the six-legged robot. The robot engineers at Shanghai Jiaotong University say, unlike other robot guide dogs, theirs is more stable. Most robotic dogs on the market have 4 legs that step in pairs, leaving them balancing on 2 legs at a time in a linear configuration, which makes them unstable. But this model has 6 legs and steps with 3 legs at a time, forming a stable triangular base and ensuring it can stand firmly without constant movement.
The 6-legged robotic guide dogs, theirs is more stable. That's because